Welcome to Faith Lessons. This is Dr. Douglas Petrovich, Professor of Biblical History and Exegesis at the Bible Seminary. This is the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is really one of my favorite books of the Bible. Actually, someday I'm hoping to write a commentary at least on the first 12 chapters of Exodus. And this book essentially acts as a transition from the days of the earliest patriarchs of the Israelites to the time of Moses, who of course is writing it. So let's quickly talk about the authorship issue. There's a big controversy, of course, over who has written the first 5 books of the Bible. A lot of secular scholars especially, and even some Christian scholars will tell us that the book was not written by Moses, but really all of the other biblical writers, or many of the other biblical writers after Moses' day, when quoting or referring back to the books of the Pentateuch, whether it's from Genesis or Exodus or Deuteronomy or one of the other books, they refer to it as having been written by Moses. And I think we can see this in the book of Exodus itself. It kind of attests to, it doesn't come out and say this book was written by Moses, but there are some places that show us that it would have been Moses who wrote it, such as Exodus 17:14, where it says, "Then he who is said to Moses, write this in a book or scroll as a memorial and recite it to Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the sky." So clearly a book or a scroll, in this case probably it would have been papyrus from Egypt. Moses was instructed to write on it as a memorial, something to be used to bring back memories of these important moments. So, and there are a couple other references as well. So the book of Exodus suggests to us that it would be Moses who is indeed the author of it. And I think with that and the fact that so many other biblical writers, including Jesus, not as a biblical writer per se, but as one who was quoted, he himself would quote from the first 5 books of the Bible as having been written by Moses. Who are the key figures in this book? Well, there are a lot of figures, and we can't go through all of them, but some of the most important would be, of course, God. He is at the center of all of this. Moses, and he is the human centerpiece, if you will. The spotlight is shining on Moses constantly in this book. His brother Aaron, who becomes the first high priest. Joshua, who becomes the assistant, the helper of Moses, and of course he will take over for Moses once Moses is ready to leave the earth. And then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and the most prominent Pharaoh, of course, that's written about is Amenhotep II. He's not named in this book. In fact, no Egyptian king is named in the book of Exodus, even though a number of them are referred to, especially in chapter 1. But that's not a surprise to us, because that was the way that what we call historiography took place. The writing and the recording of history at the time. The Egyptians themselves, they didn't refer to other kings by name when they referred to the king of a certain people group or nation. So Moses simply followed the convention of the day. That's why it doesn't say the name of the Exodus Pharaoh. Whereas later in time, in the what we call the Iron Age II, when we have the Israelite monarchy in Canaan, at that time, the historiographical protocol was different. Often you would refer to a pharaoh by name, and certainly we see that in the biblical text. The theme of the book, if you can kind of summarize what Exodus is about in as few words as possible, what I came up with, and certainly maybe you could come up with a better one yourself, but what I came up with was freeing Israel for sanctified living. And that kind of takes into account both the first half and the second half. The second half, of course, being what's going on at Sinai. The whole purpose of the law is for the people to be made holy, to be presentable to God, because God is holy, and that was his expectation of them. The purpose of the book, and I'll just keep this brief, really focuses on Moses' documenting for the Israelite people of his lifetime. The faith lesson for the book of Exodus is related to the theme of the book, freeing Israel for sanctified living. God intervened on Israel's behalf in the midst of her agonizing enslavement, as the Israelites were there for over 400 years, but in suffering for about 116 years. And he did this in order to free his people from the bondage that they were undergoing. His ultimate desire was to set them apart from all the nations, including Egypt, so that they, the Israelite people, could serve and worship God without hindrance or harassment. What that really means for us is that the Israelite people needed to be freed. They needed to see God's hand in their lives, and they needed to experience Him, to know He was there, to see that He was caring for their needs in the midst of their afflictions. So we are to be set apart to live holy lives for God's sake, because He is holy, which means we have to look inward and find what's not right in us. Find those daily tendencies that we have that show our sin nature, whether that's gossiping, whether that's judging, whether that's criticizing, whatever it is that we are gripping onto, we have to let that go, because God has called us to be holy, sanctified people.
Thanks for listening. Stay connected with us. Subscribe to this podcast.